Thank you, Dr. Abuzer Cook. Thank you all. Thank you, Novartis, for giving the opportunity. So, in our masterclass in chronic urticaria, we are heading into the last phase. So, I'll be talking about differential diagnosis, phenotypes, comorbidities, biomarkers, and chronic spontaneous urticaria. We had a very interesting morning session, so we're going to do the second half. My objectives are I want to review various clinical phenotypes, differential diagnosis, and I'm going to elaborate on the comorbidities and outline the biomarkers which we use in chronic spontaneous urticaria, and kind of tell you the reason why we use it that way. So in terms of the phenotypes of chronic spontaneous urticaria, oftentimes, we have a tunnel vision and an approach as we see chronic spontaneous urticaria. Since it's a master class, I just want to highlight on the uncommon forms as well, even though they are very rare, but they are seen. So as you, the end specialist for chronic spontaneous urticaria, you need to be aware of this. The most common forms we see is spontaneous urticaria, but there are some patients who have spontaneous urticaria with physical trigger, okay? Whereas inducible urticaria is exclusively physical trigger induced. So you need to know the difference. But there will be patients, if you look at the epidemiological data, at least 10 to 20% of spontaneous urticaria patients will have a physical trigger as well activating it. That doesn't mean that you're going to lump it on the inducible. Inducible is exclusive trigger induced, and non-trigger induced urticaria is absent. Whereas in this phenotype, you are going to have spontaneous urticaria either alone or spontaneous urticaria plus an inducible trigger. Yeah. So that differentiation is there. In the uncommon forms of chronic spontaneous urticaria, so these are case series and case reports and publications over the years. Chronic, spontaneous urticaria, predominantly vitamin D deficiency playing a role. There are a few case reports and case series. So it is important when we're seeing chronic spontaneous urticaria, especially in this region, to understand whether patient is vitamin D deficient or on vitamin D supplementation. And as you know, a lot of data is coming in terms of the vitamin D cofactor role, especially in the COVID, for patients to take, or vitamin D deficiency playing a role in other things. And autoimmune disease with chronic, spontaneous urticaria. Of course, now we are calling that almost 50% of patients with chronic spontaneous urticaria have underlying, autoimmune urticaria. Sometimes, other than this, they may have associated comorbid autoimmune diseases. They may have a lupus or rheumatoid arthritis and so on. Infections in chronic spontaneous urticaria, a lot of the publications in the infections and chronic spontaneous urticaria are more coming from the endemic regions in the Asia and Africa. So, whereas in this region, we don't see that much. But however, here we are a rainbow, so we need to keep it in the back of the mind when you're seeing a patient from that endemic region with CSU and in the past had a history of infections, especially parasitic helminthic infections. And gastroesophageal reflux disease and chronic spontaneous urticaria, Charité group has done a good job in terms of non-H. pylori, reflux-induced chronic spontaneous urticaria. So in their master classes, they showed us the data and they showed us the evidence that this reflux, is going to play a role. So concomitant reflux treatment is also important. And of course, the long-standing one, which we are very familiar, is with thyroid disease. However, the other one, which we are very familiar as well, is female estrogen tumor or hyperestrogenic states association with chronic spontaneous urticaria. And again, there's one more entity called as autoimmune progesterone dermatitis associated with chronic spontaneous urticaria. So you need to pay attention in terms of the history, when you're seeing patients. And if they have a pre-existing thyroid disease, then yes, is the thyroid correction optimal or not? Are the levels okay or not? If there's a female patient who has already hyperestrogen state as a diagnosis or is on estrogen supplementation, you need to look into that as well. Yeah. Now the last is the favorite ones, aspirin pseudoallergy, type 2 and type 3. So type 2 is, so in the aspirin sensitivity syndrome phenotype, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. One is aspirin sensitivity, previously called as aspirin exacerbated respiratory disease, here as with polyps and asthma and aspirin reactions. Whereas type 2 is these patients take the cyclooxygenase, 1 blockers, aspirin, brufen, or anything, and the urticaria starts, and the urticaria keeps on going. So they actually play a role in the origin of the urticaria. And here, so what to understand, it is the leukotriene prostaglandin pathway, which is the dominant pathway in the chronic spontaneous urticaria. The other group is type 3. So they have chronic spontaneous urticaria. They're usually well controlled with treatment. And whenever they take the aspirin brufen class of medications, they'll have massive flare or exacerbations of urticaria. If you want to know the numbers, around 15% of chronic spontaneous urticaria patients will have this type 3 manifestation. So it is important to ask them if such pattern is there, and if such pattern is there, yes, please try to avoid them. However, it is not seen with the cyclooxygenase 2 blockers. They can take it. And in the Cleveland Clinic, we did a study and we looked in these patients, whether either type 2 induced chronic spontaneous urticaria or type 3 with the aspirin, sensitivity. What about low dose aspirin? Because we were a big heart center there. And then what about these patients taking aspirin for heart disease? So low dose aspirin is below the activation threshold. So it should be okay. Any dose of aspirin below 100 milligrams is okay for the patient to take for any cardiac indication. If the patient has chronic spontaneous urticaria where aspirin or aspirin-like medications are flaring up, it's still okay to take because it is below the reaction threshold. And mast cell diseases with chronic spontaneous urticaria, of course, these patients are going to have a full spectrum of allergic diseases, urticaria. The tryptase levels are usually going up. There will be episodes of anaphylaxis. Sometimes it can be limited cutaneous mastocytosis as seen in children. So there will be, drier sign positive, plus they may be urticaria differently, or they may be having the whole thing along with urticaria. So tryptase is a biomarker, which you look in that. So these are uncommon forms of urticaria, which we need to keep in the back of the mind when we're seeing patient with chronic spontaneous urticaria. Differential diagnosis of chronic spontaneous urticaria. The most common one my dermatology colleagues will encounter is the arterial vasculitis. Okay, and this is a very textbook classic teaching in the dermatology. Clinics or academic centers, that how do you differentiate this? The lesions are long lasting, and lesions have often paresthesia. But of course, I told you paresthesia can happen in the chronic spontaneous urticaria as well because of the substance P release. But here the paresthesia is dominant. Of course, pruritus can still be there, okay? So that should not be the lone feature to guide us towards the biopsy. And lesions, whenever they're healing, they have residual skin changes, okay? And the response to antihistamines may be not optimal or poor, and sometimes may require steroids whenever there's a flare-up. So in this phenotype, it is very important to do a full thickness punch biopsy. And the shave biopsy or half biopsy doesn't help you. So when you order the full thickness punch biopsy, and the histopathologist will tell you that there is extravasation of fluid, there is perivascular infiltration, okay? And this is very atypical for the normal spontaneous urticaria. So you need to know what the normal spontaneous urticaria biopsy, you're not going to see the angel dust, you're not going to see the extravasation, you're not going to see the neutrophilic or other perivascular infiltration, okay? You're going to see rare eosinophils there, and you're going to see an intact vessel. Whereas here, the integrity of the vessel is not there, and you're going to see a lot of the other features. However, it is very, very important, as I told you, that if neutrophils are the dominant lesion, and in the hypophil, if you ask and they say the number is quite high, so this particular histological endotype you're going to treat with Dapsone, okay? So sometimes it may manifest like urticaria vasculitis, sometimes it may manifest like chronic spontaneous urticaria, and they don't respond to treatment. They're not going to respond to your traditional treatments. And when you do the biopsy and then you see neutrophilic infiltrate, you're going to manage with Dapsone-like medications. So urticaria vasculitis is our number one differential diagnosis. Lesions lasting long, and when they're healing, there is residual skin changes, and the response is not optimal to the traditional treatments we do, and biopsy is the clinching factor here. And there's one more thing, the hypocomplementemic arterial vasculitis. I was fortunate to see two patients in my urticaria career. So these patients, have typical urticaria vasculitis-like manifestations. In addition, they'll have other things as well. Lesions are long-lasting. There's paresthesia. There's residual changes. They have abdominal bone and joint, sometimes renal and systemic, features depending on when you're seeing the patient in the disease course. And the serology, you're going to see hypocomplementemia, and you have to ask for the C1q autoantibodies, and they're classically present, okay? And these patients' response to antihistamines is very, very poor, and they may require oral corticosteroids for flare-up. And once your objective diagnosis is done, both by the histology and serological confirmations, you need a definitive steroid-sparing therapy in them. And of course, mastocytosis. I want to emphasize on the cutaneous mastocytosis. We see oftentimes in pediatric patients, they come with the brownish macules and this dry sign positive, and sometimes they have urticarial lesions as well. Lesions are long lasting. And here, when we check the tryptase levels, the levels are high. And not many patients with cutaneous mastocytosis are going to progress into adult. I have 5 patients with cutaneous mastocytosis I'm managing here. Sometimes other allergic diseases may be present. And oftentimes, systemic features, if they have systemic mastocytosis or mast cell activation, are also going to be there. And we are going to look at auto-inflammatory syndromes. What is cutting here? So in the auto-inflammatory syndromes, again, you're going to see oftentimes in the pediatric, populations. So it's cutting down the path. Make sure it goes down. So the auto-inflammatory syndromes, oftentimes, they are, either hereditary or acquired. The cryopyrin ones are the hereditary ones, which we see. Familial cold auto-inflammatory syndromes, where there can be associated cold-induced urticaria. There are tests to differentiate if this is familial cold auto-inflammatory syndrome causing, or this is just cold urticaria. Muckle-Wells syndrome, your classic, where there is, sensory neural deafness and urticaria. And NOMID is there, hyper IgD syndrome, and then TRAPS. So in the auto-inflammatory syndromes, you're going to see IL-1B activation. So you're going to see a lot of auto-inflammatory manifestations along with urticaria. So that should differentiate it from the typical chronic spontaneous urticaria. The acquired ones are also there. There is systemic, systemic onset juvenile idiopathic osteoarthritis, adult onset Still disease, and Schizner syndrome. And again, in these patients, you're going to differentiate this with chronic spontaneous urticaria, but by the auto-inflammatory systemic manifestations, which are not going to typically see in chronic spontaneous urticaria. Yeah. And oftentimes these have episodic pattern where during the episode, the inflammatory mediator release is there, systemic features are there, your inflammatory markers are high, your urticaria is there, and suddenly it disappears, and again there is a flare-up. So this pattern is kind of clinically very easy to pick up. So hereditary angioedema, of course, my colleague has gone through this. The only one differentiating feature is sometimes even our colleagues in dermatology, it's quite confusing when there is a chronic erythema marginatum and there is angioedema. So it is considered as, okay, this is chronic urticaria with associated angioedema. However, the skin lesion is quite distinguishing and persistent in the chronic erythema marginatum, whereas the spontaneous urticaria lesion typically, as you know, doesn't last that long, it disappears and skin is clear. Okay. And again, one more thing to differentiate between the angioedema of the spontaneous urticaria and the hereditary angioedema is the hereditary angioedemas are very slow in onset and gradual in progression, and they last long. And whether you give antihistamines or whether you give steroids, there is no response, and complement labs are abnormal, and the sensitivity of the labs is much high during the episodes. Whereas in the angioedema associated with chronic spontaneous urticaria, it is very rapid in onset, and it is quick in progression, and then they have dramatic response to antihistamines and sometimes steroids, and complement labs are normal. So this is very important to differentiate the angioedema of the spontaneous urticaria and the hereditary angioedema with erythema marginatum. So comorbidities of chronic spontaneous urticaria. So of course, the reason why I put this slide is there is a landmark trial initiated by the National Institute of Health in US, looking at the role of vitamin D in the allergic diseases as well as the Th17 based diseases. And vitamin D, one of the slide I told you in my uncommon phenotypes, So vitamin D actually plays a predominant role as a regulator. Okay, when you see IL-10 and TGF beta, it means the mast cell regulation is happening there. So it is important to kind of make sure that your spontaneous urticaria patients have adequate vitamin D supplementation. And what we are expecting is in the coming years, the cutoff is going to be raised from 30 to 40. It's going to happen in the next few years, as you see. So vitamin D and CSU, okay? Effect of so serum vitamin D levels and vitamin D supplementation in chronic urticaria. So this is a systemic review and meta-analysis published in April 2021. In the urticaria population, especially adult chronic spontaneous urticaria patients may be at higher risk associated with low serum vitamin D. The vitamin D level is low, the disease activity may be more severe, okay? So vitamin D as an immunomodulatory and anti-inflammatory agent, can be beneficial to these patients with chronic spontaneous urticaria. So vitamin D supplementation appears to reduce the urticaria severity and improve the quality of life. So in my number one comorbidity, I will list vitamin D. Okay, so it is very important, especially in this region where we have minimal sun exposure, physical sun exposure, where we are spending a lot of time indoors. Because for cutaneous generation of vitamin D, you need 4 to 6 hours in the sun. And of course, we're not going to do that here. So it is important in chronic spontaneous urticaria patients that we do adequate vitamin D supplementation. And the meta-analysis has clearly shown that these patients, if the vitamin D is low, that plays a role in the more aggressive form. And if they are well supplemented, it will help improving the severity and quality of life. And thyroid disease and chronic spontaneous urticaria. So there has been like two distinctive phenotypes: the chronic spontaneous urticaria associated with thyroid autoantibodies, and there is autoimmune thyroid disease with hypothyroidism and urticaria. So it is very important for us to differentiate these two. In the chronic spontaneous urticaria, a third of patients will have thyroid autoantibodies. It is a surrogate marker these days. We call it as because serologically we can't measure the CIU index here. We don't have a laboratory test to measure our autoimmune type 1, type 2, A or type 2B urticaria. So we use anti-TPO or antithyroglobulin antibody presence as a surrogate marker of that. And in these patients, the thyroid activity is normal. If it's normal, then there is no need for any supplementation of the thyroid hormone. But there is a distinctive phenotype where patient has autoimmune thyroid disease. They're clinically hypothyroid, and these patients have urticaria. In these patients, it is important that the thyroid supplementation should happen. Your urticaria won't improve till the patient who is hypothyroid is corrected. So it is important to differentiate that. Our typical CSU associated thyroid autoantibodies are suggestive of the spontaneous urticaria, which is of autoimmune, whereas the clinical thyroid disease with hypothyroidism is telling us that the phenotype is distinctive, and in them, because they are hypothyroid, the thyroid hormone supplementation has to be done. So 30% of the CSU patients will have thyroid autoantibodies. Thyroxine supplementation in these patients, is proven to benefit only if they have clinical hypothyroidism. Please do understand. A lot of the times, unnecessarily, thyroxine is given in some clinics. If they are not hypothyroid, if they're not having active thyroid disease, there is no need to give supplementation. There is no role for thyroid supplementation in euthyroid patients. Okay, yeah. Gastroesophageal reflux disease, is observed. A lot of the data came from Germany, Charité group. 5.9% in CSU patients. Overlap in CSU is seen in female CSU patients. And of course, it is with H. pylori and without H. pylori. In the autoimmune, pathway, pathogenetic pathway establishment, a lot of the times we saw, even in our data, excessive unnecessary H. pylori testing has been done in these patients, okay? If the history is classic of a reflux, as there's a spontaneous urticaria patient and he has reflux, then of course I agree that, you're going to treat with PPI, it doesn't subside, then we can go and investigate for the H. pylori infection, and if we identify it, can do appropriate treatment. But there is no role for unnecessary H. pylori investigations in spontaneous urticaria patients, okay? Yeah. And the other phenotype is going to be they'll have spontaneous urticaria, they won't have reflux, there won't be any H. pylori association. And if you correct the reflux, there is benefit in the spontaneous urticaria, and more literature is coming from the Charité group in this aspect. Okay, so both reflux without H. pylori and with H. pylori is identified, and reflux in CSU associated with higher UAS7 scores, elevated blood eosinophils, elevated total IgE, and longer duration of CSU. So concomitant management is important. So we saw 3 comorbidities. One was vitamin D, and 2 was active thyroid disease or just thyroid autoantibodies without thyroid disease, and the last is the reflux with or without H. pylori. So that's all I have. Thank you so much.